Okay, we're going to talk today, coming back to the YouTube streaming. I took about a week off because of the Passover holiday. Was staying at my dad's, was not as comfortable streaming from the old man's house. Not that my dad's old, but it was a lot easier for me to stream from here. I actually did stop here on Thursday to tape something that I released earlier this evening, and basically there is a number of topics I'm going to be revisiting the next week, both in blogging and over the air. I'm going to try to do Venezuela. I'm going to try to do some interviews. Most pressing one, I think, would be one with a Catholic blogger and social media personality who we have to arrange that too. But before we get to that, and of course, Farrakhan feminism as always, but I do want to address a topic that sometimes I try to avoid talking about just because I can't give anything that pretends to even be a biased perspective about it. It kind of takes an effort, and that's the Israel-Palestine conflict. Because as some of you might know, I was a serviceman in the Israel Defense Forces about 10 years ago. So it's very difficult for me to come and say something that will be either viewed as a perspective that could be unbiased, or even on the other side, there's people who would say, "Oh, you're not being supportive enough of the Israelis." So there's really no way that I can win. And I have tried to get some people who are Palestine activists to come on the channel and at least speak to me, if not debate. It doesn't necessarily have to be a debate. But the fact is that it's not easy, and many of them are just they just don't want to talk to people that disagree with them. So why is this coming up? There was, of course, a week ago and this week, what they call the March of Return. And the March of Return is spawned by an event that happens yearly around this time of the year called the Land Day. Land Day was always kind of a protest day for Arab Israelis. So those are Arabs who are citizens of Israel, as well as Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, to demand the right of return to the ancestral lands of people, that are within Israel's borders. So those are the borders. If you look at a map, might as well bring one up. But so let's see if we can get one. Images. No, like an image. So what's a good one here? Should have had this before, but what are you going to do? This one's a little biased. Here, Pinterest. So if you look at this map over here on my left, you see here, this is present. If you can see my cursor, the yellow is the recognized borders of Israel, recognized in 1948 after the end of the War of Independence. And that was after a war that could have been avoided had the Arab states accepted the UN partition plan of 1947, which was accepted. It was voted on by the UN. Now, okay, so those of you who have watched some debates on this, for example, maybe some of you have watched the Halsey debates, Halsey English with Ryan Dawson. Yeah, I don't know how many of you did, but some of you might have. And a lot of people say, well, the UN, who gives a fuck? The UN is a meaningless organization. But in any case, these were the approved borders at the time, 1948, because that's where the front lines were at the end of the 1948 to 49 war between Israel, Jordan, Syria, Egypt, and Lebanon was also involved. But you have to take into account that the West Bank, which is currently claimed by the Palestinians, was occupied by the Jordanian, the Royal Jordanian Army, and the Gaza Strip was occupied by the Egyptians, and there was never a state that was confirmed. Hold on. There was never a state that was ever established by the Palestinians under their own leadership to actually represent them. What always happened was that up until I'd say the mid '60s, there was a there were a number of committees of people that they were representatives. I think it was called the Arab High Follow-up Committee for Palestine, and they were representatives of the Arab community in Palestine, but they were not considered to be the representatives of a nascent state in Palestine, because the West Bank and Gaza were considered Egyptian and Jordanian territory, respectively. So then in 1962, the Palestine Liberation Organization was formed, and they officially became the new representative, quote unquote, of the Palestinian people in the Arab League and other bodies that were supposedly decision making bodies of the Arab world. And then later, after 1967, when the West Bank and Gaza Strip were conquered by the Israelis and occupied, along with the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights, the PLO essentially started to acquire more and more importance in international bodies in representing the grievances of the Palestinians towards Israel, and also towards other countries like the Arab states or the United States. The PLO is essentially an organization that aggregates all the militant groups, including Fatah, which is the governing party of the Palestine Authority, and you know, and a lot of other militant groups, and it's basically their representative body. So without going into the entire history of it, the Land Day protests started in 1976 in Israel and ended violently that year with, I think, 5 deaths. And since that, on every, I think it was like April 2nd or whatever, the Palestinian land rights activists will hold a massive protest and burn tires and riot, both within Israel and within the West Bank, and for many years in Gaza when Israel also controlled Gaza. Now, so what's this whole protest now? Well, Gaza is no longer really occupied by the Israelis. Their forces were withdrawn in 2005, basically at the outset of my military service. I didn't participate in it. That would have probably been a cause for me to go to prison at the time, because I think I don't really care about holding on to land there. I just think it was a stupid plan, and it's proven itself to have been stupid, because the Israelis withdrew all of their civil and military infrastructure from the Gaza Strip, handed it over to the Palestine Authority under the president, Mahmoud Abbas, who remains the president, even though there hasn't been another election since then. And he did nothing. He basically ground in his heels. He said, okay, so you gave us the Gaza Strip. Doesn't mean anything. We're not going to negotiate. We're not going to at the time the second Intifada was going on. There was still plenty of militant activity in the West Bank, and he basically said, well, okay, so we got the Gaza Strip. We're just going to keep doing things the way we have been doing, and playing this whole game where we're interested in negotiating, but they weren't interested in negotiating. At the time, I don't really, I would say it's possible the Israelis weren't interested in negotiating either, but publicly they were. So what was the negotiation about? What would happen to the rest of the country that was disputed? The West Bank, which you can see over here. You can see it's clearly in the center of the map, says West Bank. So how much of that would go back to the Palestinians? There's still large blocks of the West Bank that are inhabited by Jews, the Israeli Jews, and then the majority population is Palestinians. So some people call that an apartheid regime. I would say that it's not necessarily an apartheid regime, because there are cases where Palestinians are allowed to acquire Israeli citizenship. It's not the same the other way. You can't become a Palestinian citizen if you're Jewish. You can check that too. Go look. It's possible. It's not easy, but it's possible for a Palestinian to marry or otherwise acquire Israeli citizenship, and it's not the other way. So there's no that in and of itself, just on that basis, refutes the idea that this is apartheid. Because if you really wanted to stay true to what apartheid is, it was basically denying the same citizenship rights to black South Africans that white South Africans could get. It was the voting issue, the one person, one vote. In South Africa, there was not one person, one vote. In Israel, there is. If you're a citizen, it doesn't matter what ethnicity you are or what religion you are, because this is actually a religious affiliation issue. It's not as much an issue of race or ethnic group. I mean, there is an element of there, but it is more of a religion issue. Therefore, there Arab Muslim and Arab Christian residents of Israel still have resident citizens of Israel still have the same voting rights as a Jewish Israeli or any other Israeli. I mean, there's even people who renounce their religion. I mean, let's say. So this Land Day protest has become now the March of Return. What is the March of Return? You have a lot of people who, during the 48 war, so this was well, it was exactly 70 years ago. Exactly 70 years ago, their grandparents or parents ran away from Israel, ran away from their homes in what was then the British Mandate of Palestine. So this was prior to the establishment of Israel, and they basically established themselves in refugee camps in Gaza without having the benefit of a new home. So they weren't allowed to take Egyptian citizenship. They weren't allowed to move out of. I think for many years they weren't allowed to move out of there anyway. They couldn't live in the rest of Egypt. They were basically stateless persons, and the Egyptian government and the other Arab governments facilitated this whole nonsense for years and years and years, decades, and they did a disservice to these people who remained refugees for a very up until this day. They're still considered technically. They're the only country where refugee status is transferred by heredity. So if you're a refugee from Punjab in British India, after the partition, many of them fled to India itself because West Punjab became part of Pakistan. But you're not considered a refugee if it was your grandpa who did that. Only your grandpa and people of his generation who had to actually flee are considered refugees over there in India. Not the same thing with the Palestinians. In their case, your children and your grandchildren are considered refugees. Doesn't happen not with the Turks and the Greeks. That doesn't happen with the Armenians. It doesn't happen with refugees in Colombia. This is the only place in the world where they make this crazy rule that everybody remains a refugee, and it is because of the political pressure of the Arab caucus within the UN, because there are certain bodies of the UN where they have enough of a block power, a voting power as a block, that they can get these things done, and including with the UN human rights committees. There's the High Commission on Refugees, UNHCR. So they have their own separate refugee agency, which is actually larger than the refugee agency for the rest of the world, even though their refugee population is actually quite small relative to other ones. Now, so there are a few sources that I looked at. I wasn't too focused on this during the week, but I figured if I don't talk about it, I'd probably end up falling behind anyway. So this is the electronic intifada. For those of you that are concerned that I only look at sources from the right, they said every Palestinian was a target at the Gaza March. and this was a podcast, which I'm not going to listen to the whole thing because it's the same thing every time. And they said, I would say there were hundreds of thousands of people. The whole area was crowded. There were people gathering, families, kids, elderly men, and elderly women. It seemed like everyone in Gaza City was heading to the borders in anticipation for the Great March of Return in Gaza. Writer and professor Rafat Al-Arira told the Electronic Intifada podcast on Wednesday. But that's actually, first of all, it's not hundreds of thousands of people. So that was his bird's eye view of the situation, or not his bird's eye view, but participants' eye view of the situation. But in reality, I think even the biggest estimates say that it was only tens of thousands both days. So it isn't hundreds of thousands. I think there's 3 million people living in the Gaza Strip total. So it isn't hundreds of thousands of people. Also, the casualties do happen to be, in many cases, militant members of the terror groups, or whatever you want to call them, militant groups. I'm not gonna tell you what to call them. You can make your own decisions, guys. But several of them are members of the Izzadin al-Qassam brigades, it is the military wing of Hamas, which is an Islamic fundamentalist group. So with these people dying and being in the protests, and several of them being caught with arms on their person, the whole civilian prism of the march is kind of a joke. So let me see here. Yeah, what I'm basically trying to say here is that, look, I'm not saying that I have the answer to what to do here, but the answer clearly is not to trust people who are marching against a fence, separating Israel from Gaza, and putting civilians in harm's way and burning tires there. And by the way, these are protests that are being encouraged by the Hamas administration in Gaza, which, you can say a lot of things about what's going on there. The fact of the matter is that these are people who are, the government there is run by an Islamist terror group, and they are encouraging people to go up against a fence that it is known that there is an armed enemy on the other side that will shoot them on the other side. So then you would say, well, okay, Ramon, fuck you, right? You would say, so what? Well, that doesn't give them the right to, fire on civilians. Well, as it so happens, I think the death toll of in 2 days, which were both a week apart, is 27 people. That includes people who were caught with weapons, or who have been traced back and shown to have links to the Hamas military wing. So the statement by Electronic Intifada and their various followers that this is an attack on all Palestinians is it's a gross exaggeration, because yes, are people being injured in the protests? Yes. Are people suffering from smoke inhalation and other issues? Absolutely. But if you're talking about mass casualty incidents, this is not a mass casualty incident. There are many other cases around the world where you see public demonstrations going down with greater loss of life, and often with civilians being they're losing their lives, targeting Palestinian civilians. Well, then why aren't more people dying? Why is it that more of these people aren't minors and old people? It's because this is simply this is a fake protest. Okay, it's not a fake protest in that the people don't want to protest. I think that there's always people who want to participate in Land Day and now what's called the March of Return. What's fake about it is that the government of the Gaza Strip is using it in order to attempt to infiltrate the Israeli security apparatus and carry out their own mass casualty incident. And what will they use it for in order to ignite a longer, more violent war against the Israelis, as has already happened 3 times since 2006. And there's already people who have been confirmed members of Hamas who were killed trying to infiltrate Israel, whose bodies were recovered and are being held hostage by the Israelis now, because the Palestinians are holding 3 Israeli citizens. I think 2 of them are actually Arab Bedouins. They're holding them hostage because they're mentally ill people who pretty much walked over there. One of them is Avera Mengistu. He wandered there too, and it's pretty much it's a very cynical game played. I mean, yeah, you could say with the Israelis it's a cynical game too, but why is it not a cynical game to hold 3 mentally ill people, 2 of them Arab Israelis, hostage in a country where they're basically their lives have virtually no value there. The Hamas group will continue to make life more and more miserable in Gaza, regardless of what Israel does. And Israel, yes, I would say that there's a reason people should not be happy with it if they live in the Gaza Strip. But there's no answer you can give people if they've basically forfeited their freedom and their individuality to fundamentalist theocracy and given over their children to their education system. And what are we supposed to do about it? You can't. This isn't the Bush years where you can go and impose, a freer system of thought onto a foreign country. It's been proven that doesn't work. He was wrong. And to conquer the Gaza Strip or to impose our belief systems on them, I don't know how you could do it. There's virtually no way. So what's going to happen inevitably, I believe, is there are going to be more and more just flare-ups of violence between the Israelis and the Gaza administration of Hamas and other Palestinian groups in the West Bank. But whether there will be like a major war over it, I don't know. It looks like the Arab states have become more and more divided in the past 10, 15 years. So I don't know if this is going to cause a regional war. Of course, the Hezbollah group in Lebanon is allied with Hamas, so there could be a major Middle Eastern conflict in the next few years. And no, the Palestinians who think, the path to salvation is resistance. Well, it's been proven that hasn't worked exactly. They had one intifada in the 80s, which was a failure. What did it give them? It gave them the Oslo Accords, okay, and a corrupt administration that they hate now, and that they've always hated. And the same people that would say, well, the intifada was the right way to go. Well, when the Intifada ended, they got a Palestinian administration, and that administration is hated now like nobody's business, because they consider it to be basically a puppet state of the Jews. They do not. I mean, whether it's true or not, they consider it to be that way. Many of them don't. The current president of the internationally recognized Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, is considered by, I'd say, the vast majority of Palestinian supporters to be basically a lame duck and an impotent fool who's there propped up by the United States and the UN and the European Union and Israel. A lot of them believe that. Whether they're correct or not, that's not the issue. Perception equals reality. That's what I've said before. In the gun debate, I've said that that's the way it works. In many cases, it doesn't matter what's the truth. What matters is what people perceive to be true. And that's the way people perceive the Palestinian administration of Mahmoud Abbas. Even most of the people on the Palestinian side who are not even supporters of Hamas believe that. You can tune into Telesur, or you can tune into the Real News or any of the and Mondo Weiss and any of those publications, and they're like, well, this guy's basically a pussy. They say that openly. This isn't me saying that. This is them. I would probably say the same thing. He's a complete like loser. But is there an alternative that would be better? I don't know if there is one yet. Um, so before I lose my train of thought, yeah, a lot of these Palestinian rights groups, they don't have an answer to what's going on. They want a larger conflagration. They want the peace process to end because they want the ultimate conflict and the resistance to come to the fore. And they believe that if there were to be a violent enough conflict, the world would simply stop supporting the Israelis. Now, yeah, I think why are they thinking that that's what's going to happen? The Israelis are already hated by most of the international community. They always cite UN resolutions, as much as they hate the UN for establishing Israel from a resolution in 1947. They love the resolutions that the UN passes against them. So, why are they thinking that if a new war were to come, that would be the game changer, and finally the international community would start hating the Israelis? It's not going to work. In fact, you can see that economically, Israel has become more and more self-sufficient in the past 20, 30 years. Certainly since I've been alive, they've become much more self-sufficient. I would only hope that they would become more to the point where we would stop sending them foreign aid from the United States, so we can dispense with that stupid setup. But yeah, the next war is going to lead to the deaths of a lot of people. It's going to be, once again, more people on the Palestinian side because they don't actually prepare for civil defense. They actually they would rather have more people die so that there's a bigger line in the news where all these people died. But they have all the infrastructure they need to build that type of, or all the supplies they need in order to build that infrastructure. They always get sent building supplies, and mysteriously they never build civil defense infrastructure. They always seem to build military assault infrastructure, meaning tunnels and other goodies for them to carry out attacks. And then when there's a high civilian death toll, which could be even higher if the Israelis wanted it, then they start to complain that they're defenseless and Gaza is a prison camp. No, I think it's worse than a prison camp. It's basically a misery factory, and it's a misery factory by design, by the Palestinians and by their supporters in the Muslim world, who need this conflict in order to create this this distraction from the complete failure of their own regimes at home. And I'll say, are the Israelis blameless in this issue? No, I think that there's certainly things that they've done to make this worse. The worst thing that they did was to sign the Oslo Accords, which when I was a kid, I thought was a good idea. I thought it was a good idea to seek peace with these people. No, they should have never signed it. They should have probably signed some sort of deal to give the West Bank back to the Jordanians, and never recognized the PLO or anything. Just found some way to settle their differences with the Arab governments that already existed. And those people that say, oh, the Palestinians need they need a representative for their rights. Well, now that they have representatives, what are those representatives doing? They're having them roll tires to an international border in order to breach that border and get shot by a much more well-armed military force. That's what they're doing as their advocates. So before we go on too long, that's it. So expect some more videos this week. Probably not on this topic, but if you want to engage on it, by all means, you can comment. You can send some messages to the Twitter. I have my Twitter and everything below. And that's about it. So good night.